Peasant Productions presents The Math of ESP, why it works even if you don't believe in it. A little bit of fun here. I'm going to tell kind of like 3 different UFO stories here for you to think about. I'm not in any way claiming that the UFOs had aliens. On the other hand, when I tell the stories, at least 1 or 2 of those you're going to realize ain't nothing that is currently talked about, shown, even shown, anything that is anything but a possible alien spacecraft. And at least one of them is a very typical example of what people are seeing and filming. One of the things I would like to point out, I am a nighttime photographer. I've been doing, like I said, I've been doing this, 45, 46 years at least. I know that when I was doing, LA street photography, LA nighttime street photography in 73, 74, 70, in the 70s, you didn't have cell phones, so you did not have millions of people with a camera just right there. I have probably seen way more UFOs than I remember, and I definitely have not yet had a chance to have a camera in my hands and ready to film something when I've seen them. Now, the most dazzling and standardized type of a story comes from when I was living in Quincy, California. Quincy is mostly national forests. It is surrounded by national forest. I had a Safeway 1,000 feet to the north of me, and if I walked out of my house and started walking south, it was about 4 or 5 miles before you would get to another inhabited human building. East and west, of course, I had neighbors, because I was on the back edge street and it was literally a mountain behind me. Very beautiful, very beautiful. But I had started smoking cigarettes again. It was during my divorce, and I realized that instead of someday accidentally popping off in my son's face or somebody else's face about some dirty deed that the ex-wife, or more likely the ex-wife's lawyers, were trying to do, I took back up smoking so that I could just say it there and say, hey, I need a cigarette break, and walk out the door. I promised my son at that time that when the court stuff was over I would quit, and in 2007 when I got out of prison, yes, I had been thoroughly informed that I would be killed if I ever entered a U.S. court. So by the promise to my son, that court was over and I needed to go ahead and stop smoking cigarettes, and I did so. But in Quincy, and this is basically the 98, 99, 2000 time period, I had stepped out to have a cigarette. It might have actually it might have been earlier than that, because my son was with me 3 days a week, and I would go out in the backyard both when he was there and when he wasn't. I would not smoke cigarettes in the house. I don't want to, I didn't want to contaminate my kids' lungs. I was out back having a cigarette, and as usual, just looking up at the stars and enjoying the scenery and all of that. And kind of common, because we were kind of in the air lane from San Francisco to Midwest to East Coast, Salt Lake City areas. Even I suppose even Rockies kind of flew in the range of what we would see. So seeing airliners go over was quite normal. And I also knew that, FAA rules and regulations, there's a certain distance that these things have to maintain at all times. So I was out there one night having a cigarette, and I watched one go over the top of my head. or it was going along, and another light was coming over and across at kind of an intersecting line. And I grew up sailing, so I know how to plot a intersection. So to know that you need to either change course because you're about to get rammed by a oil tanker, or run into an island or a breakwater or something like that. Then as I'm watching it, the one got closer and closer, and it literally crossed in front at a level that was almost like right there in front of the airliner. And yes, I was definitely 100% aware and watching this and just staring at it to watch. And it literally came across and did a 90-degree turn and started going directly in front of the airliner. Now, the average airliner only does about 300, 400 miles an hour. So doing a helicopter 90-degree turn at 300 or 400 miles an hour isn't exactly normal for anything that anybody in human military right now claims to have. Okay, Area 51, which was just a few hundred miles away from me, of course, was a different story what they can do there. The B-1, B-2 bomber, the stealth fighters were all developed out there at Groom Lake. So I am well aware of that area and some of the strange stuff that I have seen fly overhead because of that. But the lights blinked, and it went from being just basically kind of a couple of white lights to a flashing red, flashing green, flashing blue, 3, 4 different lights all going on as it was literally going in front. And I watched it for some time because I had 200-foot tall trees at the base of my property, and they literally went through the trees, and I kind of ducked and ran and watched and got on the other side of the trees and watched the two continue for a while. So I'm going to say, 10, maybe even 15 seconds these two were there, and then the lights blinked out, and the jetliner just continued on north, probably, headed for Vancouver or something like that. So that's one UFO story that to this day you're not going to disprove, and I don't have any footage to totally prove it, but it's there in one of those events. Another night I went out and I had been watching the International Space Station data, and I knew that the shuttle was up there and had just disconnected from the International Space Station. And I was watching the data on the computer screen, and I decided that hey, by the way, it's going to go almost right overhead here in a few minutes. Hey, maybe I should just go step outside and watch my little International Space Station baby go flying over my head. I did create the thing. I do have quite a bit of an attachment to my little International Space Station, which isn't so little. And sure enough, there it is going over. And then I noticed a little ways back, I better hold my hands down here where they're right. A little ways back, there's a trailing dot behind it. So I immediately thought, International Space Station shuttle. And all of a sudden, this one does an S curve and just turns off. This one was going down in a southeast direction, and this one turned and went almost 100% due east. Okay, we were talking about a 45-degree angle off. But it did an S turn. The shuttle can't do an S turn. And it took me, from the time I was standing there and saw that movement, all the way to back, walking over to the door of my office to go look at the screen, to realize that I just saw something that the shuttle couldn't do. And I kind of stopped and walked back up there and watched the ISS go on out of the screen, and whatever it was long since over the horizon. And I sat there and realized I had just seen another UFO. For whatever else you want to say, there is no Star Wars TIE fighters. There is no Star Trek shuttlecraft. Okay, so that would have had to have been that kind of a thing going up there, that kind of maneuverability, and had to change course and taken its speed from trailing to another 4,000 or 5,000 miles per hour at least to make an S turn that took only a second or so to do and go off to the east. Okay, and then the third little bit of a UFO story is kind of amusing. It was back in the beginnings of what we call the Juju House, which was a house of a bunch of people who understood psychic ability, and we all practiced stuff. And I came home from work one night thoroughly disgusted with life around me and the people around me and all of that. And I kind of broadcasted it up a beam of light into space. And I didn't think too much about it, just, I did my quick little meditation of, come on UFO, get me out of here, I'm sick of this place. And that was, 1978. And the next morning, I was sitting there with a friend, and we flipped on the news, and we were kind of sitting back, and it came across the news that Australia's east coast up into the Micronesia island areas, all of Indonesia, there were literally hundreds of reports of a single UFO going along this island area and up through all these islands. And my image that I had broadcast was, I'm on the mainland just inside the little island of Catalina, and I kind of, didn't quite envision all of North America, but just, chunk of land with an island offshore. And yeah, they had literally they had this humongous. I mean, there were I think at least 3 different airliners that reported seeing some kind of a UFO going up and across and past them. From Australia, there were reports all the way up into Micronesia, which is literally thousands of miles away, of people just reported seeing this thing going across. So those are a couple of things to think about in the UFO realm. Strange stuff happens, and while they may not be lizard eating, or people eating lizards, and some of that stuff, there is very highly a probability that if you have billions of solar systems inside of billions of galaxies, then chances are you've probably got billions of planets that have life on them. And remember what I talk about in the scientific mistake. Oh, look, we shot this picture from 500 million miles of light years away. It's 500 million years old, folks. You don't know what it is now. That simple, okay? So yeah, there's any kind of possibilities out there. And yes, I do thoroughly believe in UFOs. And I have seen enough with my own eyes that I can validate to myself and any God I stand in front of that such an existence is possible. Okay? So there's a little fun for you. A Merry Christmas.